Well, welcome, dear friends. And the subject, as you know, is New York. So we'll start out by asking, Mario, why didn't you run for president?
Well, I'm a New Yorker. That's probably the reason. You said there were two kinds of New Yorkers. E.B. White, I think, said there were three kinds. The ones who were born here, the ones who immigrate from some other place and come here, and the commuter, who should, of course, be paying more in taxes. But the New Yorker who's born here, as I was, is invariably a New Yorker who's having a love affair with the city, but is not awed by the city. I mean, New Yorkers who were born here are not awed. They may be awful occasionally, but they're not awed by the city. They're the kind of people who, for example, will never go to the Empire State Building because they know it's there, and they can always go there, so they never do. And there's that kind of perversity. And maybe that's why I didn't run for president.
You know, it's very interesting. I meant the question purely as a joke, and he's so decent that he answers it.
I'm thinking of running for president.
We could do a lot worse than we have. I'd ask you both, since at least two of these possibilities occurred, one coming here from one place and one born here to Jane. What was it like coming here? When did you start to feel that you were a New Yorker after a while, when the place was yours, coming from Indiana?
Well, one of the happiest nights of my life was New Year's Eve, 1984. You know what I mean, 83. The next day was 84. I'm in the hospital, and I have just given birth to two native New Yorkers. And this was a total thrill for me. By that time, I knew I was going to stay in New York for my life. I've been here now more than half my life. So, you know, I've chosen pretty deep roots here, I think. But to have children who were native New Yorkers and then have friends and relatives from, you know, back in Indiana or anywhere, and I would get to torment them with things like, well, how can you raise children in New York City, Jane? And I would say, well, they ride the subway. And they play in Central Park. And they walk to school by themselves.
Growing up, Mario, here, different now? You raised your children in New York, too, most of them. Different for you than for them?
All of them actually raised here. Christopher was very young when we went to Albany, which is a nice place, incidentally, but
really?
I made the mistake once of describing it as constant Lent. I don't think it's different now that I've seen my own children raised here by Matilda mostly, and I'm watching my grandchildren be raised, most of them right here in the city too, or some of them at least in the city. I don't think there's much of a difference. The nature of the problems has changed a great deal. When I was growing up myself in the city, and even when Andrew and the others were growing up, there wasn't really any crack yet. There wasn't, when I was growing up, there was just marijuana. Big deal. It was a serious problem then, but nothing like heroin and crack, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's more violence now than there was then. And, but apart from the nature of the problems, I don't think things have changed a great deal. The city is still a wonderful, wonderful place to raise children. One of my daughters was saying to me today, she lives in a suburb, a very fancy suburb, and she has 3 children. And she is desperate to come back to the city because they're of an age now where the oldest one is to go to high school. She doesn't want them going to high school in a suburb with a lot of rich kids and losing the diversity, losing the museums, losing the excitement, losing the education that you get just by existing in this city. And so she's planning either on educating them all here or moving back to the city and using her home in the suburbs as a weekend retreat, because she thinks this is a better place to educate your children than outside the city.
John Cheever said, "My children were young and my favorite New York was the one they led me through on Sunday afternoons. A girl in high heels can show you Rome, a drinking companion is the best for Dublin. And I enjoyed New York. I enjoyed the New York my children knew." Something about the perspective of it, something about seeing the city through a kid's eyes. What quality, Jane, if asked, what quality separates New York from other big cities? I mean, there are cities as big.
Intensity, but also, if I can kind of twist the answer a little bit, I lived in Chicago for 1 year. When I left Indianapolis and first joined NBC, it was with the WMAQ, the owned and operated station in Chicago, which was an incredible step for me, because Chicago, Indianapolis, there's no comparison. Before I left Indianapolis, and I would read the Chicago Tribune or the Sun-Times or the Chicago Daily News, and I began to see my name in the papers, and this wasn't a happy thing. It would be in the context of, oh, there was one IQ of a cantaloupe, hood ornament, that kind of thing. And I hadn't even arrived yet. I was looking for an apartment and stopped and asked a garage attendant for directions. He recognized my face from those pictures and said, "Poor baby." I was there for 365 completely unsuccessful days before I left for New York City, having been advised on how the proper way to pronounce Chicago, the proper way, in fact, to say Goethe Street is accurate, and so on and so forth. Every opportunity to be reminded that I was, or remind other people that I was, an outsider. As far as New York cared, I was a New Yorker the minute I got here.
Why was that?
I chose it. I came. You're here. Fine. You're one of us.
Let's get to the business.
Yes.
Get to work. Any particular quality that you have associated with the city, Mario?
I've been here all my life, and I assume I'm going to die in the city. Not right away, I hope, but eventually. You can't describe it. If you're asked to describe it, you don't have the time, you don't have the words, because everything is here. I mean, after 9/11, everybody asked the same question. Why would a good God let this happen to innocent people? And there is no answer to that question. We go over and over it, whether you're talking about the Holocaust or 9/11 or now the Columbia. And the answer you come to after you read the rabbi's book and you find that's no answer, why bad things happen to good people, and Teilhard's not an answer, and even Moses didn't have an answer. You conclude the most important thing you have is life. And l'chaim is one of the best toasts you can make, because that's the one value we're sure of, the next breath we can draw. Well, if you want to have as much life as you could possibly have, you'd have to be in New York, because every kind of life is here. Every challenge, every kind of person. There's more diversity here. There's more intelligence here. There's more passion here. There's more disappointment here. The place is so big, so grand, so completely developed on the surface that you've had to build up into the air with the skyscrapers that make us magnificent. But the world that nobody sees and never visits is even more dramatic under the streets. We have a tunnel. We have a tunnel that you probably haven't had the chance to visit. It's going to take 50 years to complete. It is now 900 feet below the street into the rock. It's the water tunnel. It will cost billions of dollars. It's the largest project of its kind in history. Nobody ever sees it. It's under our streets in New York. I mean, just imagine, and that's not to mention the jungle that exists beside that tunnel of Con Ed lines and telephone lines and all kinds of things. There is nothing like it. It is inexplicable. And if you want to have every kind of life and have all the disappointment and all the joy that you can people ask me if I travel a lot. I said, well, I was governor, I had to travel, and I've traveled since then, and we have offices all over the world, so I visit those. But you don't have to travel to see the world. Stand on 42nd Street for about, and just say hello to every one of the 180 ethnicities that come by.
You were mentioning the intelligence of the city. Unkindly, Neil Simon said there are 2 million intelligent people in New York and 78 in Los Angeles.
Those are former New Yorkers we checked
Right.
out.
New York institutions, places we like, particularly when you raise children in the city. Any particular favorites of places, museums or parks or?
Oh, yeah, the Natural History Museum.
Why that?
That was, well, if it rained, that was the backyard. It was unbelievable that something that magnificent would become so familiar to my children. You know, all the creatures.
Great scientists, Steve Gould, others, all remember that.
Yeah, I don't know if they learned anything there, but boy, they played there a lot. It was great.
It's a marvelous place. I have foisted a couple of things on our guests to read because they seemed worth our hearing again. And one is Holden Caulfield's description in The Catcher in the Rye, which I'm going to give to Mario, of his visit to the Museum of Natural History.
Then you'd pass by this big glass case with Indians inside it rubbing sticks together to make a fire, and a squaw weaving a blanket. The squaw that was weaving the blanket was sort of bending over, and you could see her bosom and all. We all used to sneak a good look at it, even the girls, because they were only little kids and they didn't have any more bosom than we did. Then just before you went inside the auditorium, right near the doors, you passed this Eskimo. He was sitting over a hole in this icy lake, and he was fishing through it. He had about 2 fish right next to the hole that he'd already caught. Boy, that museum was full of glass cases. There were even more upstairs with deer inside them drinking at water holes and birds flying south for the winter. The birds nearest you were all stuffed and hung up on wires, and the ones in the back were just painted on the wall, but they all looked like they were really flying south. And if you bent your head down and sort of looked at them upside down, they looked in an even bigger hurry to fly south. The best thing, though, in that museum was that everything always stayed right where it was. Nobody'd move. You could go there 100,000 times, and that Eskimo would still be just finished catching those 2 fish. The birds would still be on their way south. The deer would still be drinking out of that water hole with their pretty antlers and their pretty skinny legs. And that squaw with the naked bosom would still be weaving that same blanket. Nobody'd be different.
Nice. Streets, avenues, other places. Things come to mind?
Do you know where I grew up? 8950 East New York Street.
Is that right?
Indianapolis, Indiana. New York Street, no kidding. It was destiny.
There was destiny, exactly. Streets now, side streets, avenues. I used to work at the Time and Life building on the Avenue of the Americas, and just used to love to move into the huge number of people moving back and forth along that kind of anonymous street and the anonymity of the street. And then Broadway, something else entirely.
I saw Broadway when I was 10. I'm sorry, so much of my perspective on New York is as an outsider. And sorry, you will never appreciate the full magic of the place if you were born here. But at 10 years old, we came here for some reason, and I saw The Music Man with Robert Preston. And after the show was over, we stood by the stage door, and Walter Pidgeon came out. I did not know who he was, but he patted me on the head, said, "What are you doing up so late, little girl?" A Broadway actor. It was just incredible. The lights. I remember being knocked out on a separate visit at the age of 15. My father, this is really uncharacteristic of my father, sitting at the dinner table, had a long weekend from school, and evidently he'd taken some time off from work, and says, why don't we go to New York? Why don't we go to New York after dinner? We did. We got in the car and we came to New York City. I think it was Columbus Day weekend. Took my best friend Judy. We went shopping at Saks Fifth Avenue. We both showed up at school Tuesday with opaque stockings, which is what the girls were wearing, and miniskirts, which were shorter or longer than I am now wearing. But it looked like a miniskirt back then. Such glamour, and for some reason, the image I see in my mind's eye is the Americana Hotel, which was real glamorous from the street level. There's just a little snapshot of, and now I pass it every day, only it's not the Americana anymore.
Just to take us to Broadway here, I found this. It was such a pleasure reading what Helen Keller, because of the perspective of everything internalized, everything imagined in this remarkable mind. So Jane agreed just to read this short paragraph about Broadway. Helen Keller.
As I walk up Broadway, the people that brush past me seem always hastening toward a destination they never reach. Their motions are eager, as if they said, we are on our way, we shall arrive in a moment. They keep up the pace, they almost run. Each on his quest, intent, in endless procession, they pass, tragic, grotesque, gay. They all sweep onward like rain falling upon leaves. I wonder where they're going. I puzzle my brain, but the mystery is never solved. Will they at last come somewhere? Will anybody be waiting for them? The march never ceases. Their feet have worn the pavements unevenly. I wish I knew where they were going. Some are nonchalant, some walk with their eyes on the ground, others step lightly, as if they might fly if their wings were not bound by the multitude. A pale little woman is guiding the steps of a blind man. His great hand drags on her arm. Awkwardly, he shortens his stride to her gait. He trips when the curb is uneven. His grip tightens on the arm of the woman. Where are they going?
That's wonderful. We were talking about standing 42nd Street, talking all the variety of people. How does this work? It has always struck me that a greater, and God knows we've had enough trouble and tensions, but still, a greater variety of people seem to get along better in New York than they do in most other places. Have you thought about this?
Well, I think about diversity a lot. I always did as a kid, and have even more since then, especially since it's a big political issue, it's a cultural issue, and this is the most diverse place in the world. I mean, literally the most diverse place in the world. I'm trying to think what other nation was created as we were by taking pieces from all the different cultures and dragging them here. I guess Australia comes the closest to having been created as a nation that way. And diversity, of course, the variety is rich. All these cultures are an advantage to have and to share and to participate in, but they're also, the difference is also an invitation to hostility, because there's something in the human psyche that says if you are different, I have to be aware of you. It goes back, I guess it's a primal kind of instinct. The first thing is to fear something that's different from you. And so that has always been a big problem. I think overall, and we've had our problems. I grew up with race riots in South Jamaica. We all remember Bensonhurst, and we remember other bad situations that have occurred in this town. And there were, of course, historically the draft riots, one of the ugliest things that ever happened in the United States of America. So we've had our ugly moments, no doubt. But considering that there's so much variety here, there's so much diversity, there's an astounding amount of tolerance. Jane says she comes here and nobody notices. That's right, because everybody is from somewhere else. Everybody comes from, you have literally 180 ethnicities. If you go to Jackson Heights today, I did this with a New York Times reporter a few years ago, talking about diversity. We went down the street in Jackson Heights, and I said, I want to count different nationalities, see how many. We got 17 before we got to the end of the block, 17 different nationalities. the owner of the store, et cetera. And so we're tolerant, I think, because we have to be, because there's so much difference. If you were going to pick on each difference as an occasion for an argument, you'd never do anything but fight. And so, yeah, there are problems. There's a downside to that much diversity, but overall, I think it's been a great virtue for us.
I got to tell you, growing up, diversity in my neighborhood was, they had a Ford and they had a Chevy, and my high school was 100% white and 95% Protestant, and you knew who was Catholic and you knew who was Lutheran, and there was one Jew on the faculty. That was it. You wouldn't believe it.
But he was the sweetest of them.
Oddly enough, he taught German. I don't know, but I was assigned by NBC to go back home, do a story about your hometown. They sent all of us back to our hometowns, and I'm in a panic because I've always feared that it would be discovered that I came from nowhere where nothing happened. I went back and discovered that my high school I have described had become fully integrated in my absence by busing. That they had a race riot in the cafeteria and closed the school down for 3 days. The reputation still sticks to them. By the time I made the phone call and started learning all of this, however, they have added diversity to the school motto. There was a banner proclaiming diversity in the hall, and the principal was on his way to Washington because he was Indiana's Principal of the Year. Diversity was unfamiliar. They didn't know how to cope with it. Where here you've got, yes, all those differences, but the one thing you have in common is, well, we're all different.
It's absolutely right.
I did not have anybody who was different from me growing up.
One change from when I was a kid was that the island of Manhattan was far more diverse in terms of economic strata than it has been recently, that it's become the rich gem in the center, and then the boroughs around poorer. That's the downside to New York, because when I grew up in neighborhoods where I was growing up in a nice, safe little neighborhood, but it wasn't a question of safe. It was next to 3rd Avenue. The L was still up. Most of my friends were on the other side of 3rd Avenue. We played stickball or stoop ball or whatever we would do. And you got the sense of living in a somewhat tense, although it was just most of it was the normal tension of being a kid. But otherwise, a place where rich, sort of rich, not rich, very poor, were all together. And that's a loss for Manhattan now. You saw this in your lifetime. Yeah,
I think what happened, first of all, we have to keep clear that the city is not Manhattan. And as a guy from Queens,
yes, I know. I know how sensitive you are. But.
Well, I can't tell you how much I resent getting off the plane at the Kennedy Airport.
Why don't you tell me how much you resent it?
And seeing the sign that says "To the City," when you're in Queens. So.
And we who live in the city welcome that.
Yeah.
I couldn't find the city if there weren't for that sign.
What was your question?
No, I forget. Well, actually, to extend that always existed. No matter what borough you were in, they would still, move towards
what happened with Manhattan. We have to remember now that the place did start in Manhattan, and the Dutch, and you had the Dutch, and then the English, then the Mediterraneans, and on and on and on. And whereas other places that were settled in the very beginning were settled probably for religious reasons. You came here for the Catholics down in Maryland or whatever, and up to the Northeast, we had another group. Here they came to do business. And it was a commercial enterprise from the beginning. And Manhattan became more and more commercial. And when it was industrialized, when the Industrial Revolution occurred, Manhattan became more commercial. Then when we get into the era of finance and services and banking, et cetera, that's when it really became the center of finance for the world, Manhattan. And that's what the Twin Towers were all about, I think. I think when they picked the Twin Towers as a target, it was because it was a symbol of America, the way the Statue of Liberty was, recognized all over the world. But specifically, in addition to that, what made it a sweeter target from their point of view was that it was a commercial center. And that's had its consequences. A lot of rich people live and earn a living here. We have the most expensive apartment life in the country right here. And the real estate is so valuable that you can't afford to have middle-class Rosenblatts and lower-class Cuomos living there. You really can't. You can't afford to build housing. The construction is so expensive, the real estate's so expensive that you go to Astoria or somewhere else to do it. And then eventually to Long Island, that was the growth of the suburbs. So you're right, there's been a big change in Manhattan. The boroughs, not so much. Queens and Brooklyn are still very much the way they were. When I grew up, you identified yourself by your precinct or your parish. Where you're from, St. Monica's, you know. Where are you from? 103rd Precinct. Oh, really? And there are still, you still have some of that in this southern part of the Manhattan, but you still have a lot of it out in the boroughs.
Here's Alfred Kazin when he was a kid, taking this from this wonderful thing, A Walk in the City, taking the subway in from Brooklyn. When I was a child, I thought we lived at the end of the world. It was the eternity of the subway ride into the city that first gave me this idea. It took a long time getting to New York, in quotes. It seemed longer getting back. Even the IRT got tired by the time it came to us and ran up into the open for a breath of air before it got locked into its terminus at New Lots. As the train left the tunnel to rattle along the elevated tracks, I felt I was being jostled on a camel past the last way stations in the desert. Anything about the city that you have not liked? There's tons of evidence, quotations of people who just could never abide the city. You know, always as much as they. Here's Pat Conroy. It is an art form to hate New York properly. So far, I've always been a featherweight debunker of New York. It takes too much energy and endurance to record the infinite numbers of ways the city offends me.
Two things about that. Number one, I'm kind of a glass half empty person, and you know that, and I don't know why you invited me here, but
I wanted the glass full.
so that I adore New York, but my orientation is to concentrate on the things I would like New York to work on. My children experience their mother in much of the same way. Love them, but let's talk about some improvements that could be made. They don't listen, neither does New York. But the thing that just makes me furious are the schools. I've been loosely involved with some school things for some years, and you visit them, and the schools will have auditoriums, you know, maybe like this or grander, with fabulous murals painted on the walls and towering, windows. And I wonder, were they built by aliens who left? What happened? I mean, obviously, look at the schools. This was a place that valued education more than anywhere on earth in modern times. What the hell happened?
You must have dealt with this time and time again. The state of the schools, the state of education.
Well, I think Jane is absolutely correct. I mean, it's a tragedy. And as a fellow who went to PS 50 and then Scheimer Junior High School, and got a really good education. I mean, and if it weren't, that's all Mama and Papa came here for, were to be able to get an education for their kids. And if it weren't for those good public schools, I later was able to get some private schools, scholarships, but my basic education was in the public schools. And I went back to PS 50, and I went back to Scheimer when I was governor, and they gave me an honorary degree from Scheimer Junior High School. and I saw that neither of them had a library. Neither of them had a library, and I was heartsick. I said, "How could you not have a library?" I saw that at PS 50, the kids were not allowed to take the books home. I said, can't, well, what do they do for homework? Now you're the governor, and you're supposed to have power, et cetera, and you look around at a school system, which is basically, when it comes to public schools, two school systems. One, if you are in a high real estate community, like Great Neck or Purchase or any of those rich suburbs, even some districts in New York, but this for a different reason, District 26 in Queens, upper middle class people, et cetera, those schools are good to excellent. If you're in poorer communities, poorer parts of Manhattan, poorer parts of Queens, the southern part of Long Island, the same thing, where you have the poorer kids, and color now enters into it because disproportionately African Americans were found in the poorer neighborhoods. Those schools are poorer. Why? Because we never accounted for the social problem that was there, for the difficulty in teaching those kids, because they were a broken home or this reason or that reason. And we have now developed a terribly weak system where a strong system is needed the most, educating the children who need the most help. I think maybe the best thing that the mayor has done so far, and I feel for this guy, I really do, because he inherited a terrible situation, and he had nothing to do with it, and he's trying very, very hard to deal with it. But he worked a small miracle that many of us tried for 20 years to get done, and that is to make a big difference in the Board of Education. Now, the difference was he got rid basically of the old Board of Education. That's not the important thing. The important thing is he made a big difference and everybody knows it. And once he established that he could make a difference, now you can make more of a difference. It's going to take money, however. And what irritates me about that, and then I don't want to politicize this, but it has everything to do with the city, has everything to do with the city of New York and other cities and other places in this country where education is down. The President of the United States I cheered when he said, when he became president, that he was going to make education a high priority. And when he and Ted Kennedy got together and did an education bill, I said, this is wonderful. He meant it, he's going to do it. Leave no child behind. Great. Well, he hasn't left the child behind, but he's left the child with no money. They had a program, and he's not funded it. Now, that wouldn't be bad if he was broke, like Bloomberg. But he has already given the second largest tax cut in American history, $490 billion of which is about to be paid out to 1 million taxpayers, the richest in America. $490 billion. And he wants $674 billion more in tax cuts. And we're going forward with a war that today was estimated could cost, now listen to this number, $1.6 trillion if we have the war, win the war, and stay in Iraq for 7 years, which is highly likely. Now, if you're going to spend all that money on all these other things, and I could extend that list, how then do you justify not having invested what you promised to invest in schools? Actually, they should give us much, much more. Healthcare and education should be our two priorities. Healthcare and education.
In a little while, we're going to talk together. I just wanted to see if I could cover some of the bases, one of which is imperiled New York, which we feel peculiarly and acutely since 9/11. Has your feelings, Jane, Mario, changed about the city since 9/11 in terms of a life of danger, personal life of danger, endangered city, change of mood?
I scare pretty easily, and like a lot of people, it took a long time to stop quivering. And then I think I took great comfort in the mass of us, all being, together in this. And ultimately, I think it made me feel safer to be here.
Interesting. Mario, you?
H.G. Wells, I guess. Did you say that in your book, Roger? Did you point out H.G. Wells? And
Yes, it was either there or some piece in the Times. I was amazed to find it. Do you remember when that was written?
Well, it was in 1900-something.
1907, before planes.
H.G. Wells says that in the modern era, New York City would be the target of flying instruments. And E.B. White, 1948, says exactly the same thing. 1993, they bombed the World Trade Center, and still we're immune because we're New Yorkers, and nobody's going to lay a glove on us. We're not only Americans, like even people from Indiana are, we're New Yorkers, and nobody's going to touch us. And then 9/11 really did change that. There's just no question about that. And now we're more vulnerable, we're more anxious, etc. The point Jane makes is one I feel profoundly too, and that is it was beautiful seeing people hold hands and sing the hymns and chant, and that unity was wonderful. But that unity, as was said by one of the two people in the press conference about the Columbia, that unity we've always had in crises. We had it in the Second World War. No more Jew, Gentile, black, white, woman. We were all together fighting the evil forces. But in the intervals between the crises, we're not that good at coming together in this country. Now, the president wants to give huge tax cuts to me and my clients, and I raise an objection and say, no, give it to education and health care. The president says, class warfare. You're immediately pitting one against the other. And the truth is, we don't come together as we should in the intervals between the crises. We're not good at saying, hey, look, let's share benefits and burdens in this country for the good of the whole. One of the things that's made New York great is its competitiveness. One of the reasons that people do leave New York is that they don't make it here. Both my father's father and my father-in-law's father both came to New York, both failed, both went back to Italy and instructed their sons, one in Salerno, one in Sicily, don't you ever go to New York. They say that, the streets are paved with gold. They're not paved at all, and they expect you to pave them, So that competitiveness is a virtue, but it also, I'm afraid, it also can be a problem in trying to make the best society for the most people. That competitiveness gets in the way. 9/11 made a big difference in creating a new vulnerability, and it's a reminder that the way you were strong in addressing 9/11, we should be strong in addressing all our problems.
Could we have the lights up a bit and talk among ourselves, as the saying goes?
I did that. Thank you.
Raise a hand and talk. These need not be questions. You can address them, needless to say, to anyone here, or comments or just thoughts about the city. Yes, sir.
I have to say I'm not a resident of New York. I'm certainly fascinated, especially in my last trip.
I will repeat the question as soon as it gets formulated.
With my friend's help, Carol Dickman, I have discovered a great deal about the city, and I'm very excited to come here with a project that I have designed for the last few months, as you said, to reshape the world. And Mr. Cuomo talking about billions of dollars underground. I designed a project called I America for the World Trade Center replacement. I think it's the most fantastic design, everybody says so. But I don't seem to be able to penetrate or pierce the veil of bureaucracy to show it to anybody, just to look at it.
Well, you've come to the right place. He speaks of a design that he had called I America in response to the World Trade Center, or for part of the world.
It can be seen on WW. Doctors have done that.
And I can tell you right now, it's going to be a large segment on Dateline. I don't think there was a question there, but let's have one. Yes.
Why not? I was born in New York, got a great education here, thank goodness, through City College and all that, and went through various things in my career, and ended up, I now sell New York. I work with people who come to the city. It's my job, it's my horrible job to go to theaters, go to hotels, go to restaurants.
You're saying you sell New York. How do you sell New York? In what context?
What's called a receptive tour operator, or a destination management company. So I go out promoting New York, and I work with groups. There's nothing. I love my
I love it. Good enough. Something else. A thought, a question? Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. It's you. I thought that hand was up behind you.
Do you find that a lot of your enjoyment of New York comes from being able to afford a night out at the theater with dinner and the babysitter and possibly the private schools? I find a lot of it is income oriented.
Money in New York.
Well, I mean,
How important, the question is, do you find, talking about babysitters, but the idea is the enjoyment of New York really dependent so much on money?
Yeah,
And on the haves rather than the
I think,
have-nots?
I think of course. But one of the reasons that I, speak and think about the school so much is that I would like every kid in New York to have the same opportunities my kids did. As for going out, who does that?
Yeah, I don't think there's any question that if you have a lot of money, you eat in better restaurants, or at least more expensive ones, and you get to see more plays, et cetera, et cetera. And this is an expensive city. It's more expensive than most cities in the United States, even most big cities. And that's a problem, because not everybody can enjoy it. Not everybody can make it here. On the other hand, there's more free entertainment here. Mm-hmm. And there's more access here to people who don't have money than anywhere in America. There's more going on here, the museums by themselves. Here, I love, I guess Da Vinci, there's a showing at the Met, but my favorite now is Picasso in Queens at MoMA.
Yeah, that's right.
See? MoMA's gone to Queens, and they're getting bigger crowds in Queens than they ever got in Manhattan.
But even there, Picasso said, if I can only get back to the city.
So the answer is, I think, yes, money is relevant, and you have to be able to afford New York City. Look, to get an apartment in New York City, to find space. The lack of affordable housing is one of the things that Ed Koch and I worked hardest on together. Something that most of you probably don't know. Rockefeller designed the Battery Park housing program. That's luxury housing in the original description. Hugh Carey built one building of Battery Park. I built all the others in the next 12 years. But it occurred to me that, luxury housing as a state project in a place where you were desperate for affordable housing doesn't make sense. There's plenty of luxury housing. And so we had a plan to take $1 billion in profits out of Battery Park and spend it on affordable housing. And we did get to about $200 million worth, just to provide some opportunity for middle-class people, struggling middle-class people, to live on the island here in Manhattan. And so money is a problem. On the other hand, you have magnificent availability to all sorts of entertainment, even if you don't have money.
Yes, ma'am.
Speaking of money, we're obviously in bad economic times, and Bloomberg's doing a great job, I think, but he's proposing many budget cuts. How do you think that's going to affect the city short-term and long-term?
Question is, budget cuts affecting the city long-term, short-term?
I think
Hurts.
I just am so frustrated that with the, I mean, I'm not here to support any particular plan for the schools, but 10 years or so ago, I was at some dinner in Washington, and I was seated. My dinner companion was John Sununu, who was, frankly, not that charming as a dinner companion, but, and I, you know, I'm not all that great as a dinner companion either. I mean, I can interview people, but you know, I can't talk socially. But I asked him a question that, frankly, I thought was pretty good. I was genuinely interested. I said, you must have to make, you know, dozens or scores or hundreds of decisions, you know, every day, and without, you know, the time to, you know, weigh alternatives as completely as you might like. So, do you have a strategy for decision making? And he said how often it was that, you know, there are apparently competing choices, apparently valid, you know, reasons for either one, and all you can do is pick one and then mobilize your resources and your energies to making it work. And that's what I think about with the plan that Bloomberg has suggested, and, you know, the school's chancellor Joel Klein, and all the nitpicking about whether it is the best or the bad, and you know, just flip a coin. You know, let us all as New Yorkers agree. We will flip a coin. We will choose a program, and then we will make it work. And you know, you have no money, and to harp about, you know, what you can or cannot do. We don't have the luxury of the conversation and the politics with budget cuts. We just have to find a way to agree and do something and make it work.
The budget cuts in education, healthcare will hurt a great deal and will depreciate the quality of life in this city and in other cities around the United States of America. And having been there for 12 years, most of which were lousy years economically, these were the Reagan-Bush years when he was cutting taxes for the people at the top and also loading up the taxes for everybody else, increased the Social Security tax, and when you cut the taxes at the top, biggest tax cut in history in '82, they paid for it in part by reducing the amount of money they sent to the cities and states. Net result was at the city level, you had to raise property taxes, sales taxes, which are the worst kinds of taxes. They're called regressive taxes because they hurt poor people and middle-class people. You know, the same, that you, Donald Trump and you pay the same sales tax. So these taxes are very damaging. Okay. I would be able to accept it more easily if it were true that we don't have money. We have billions and billions and billions of dollars, and you heard it in the State of the Union. Now, out of the blue, notwithstanding that the federal budget has a $300 billion deficit, out of the blue, the president suddenly announced, and those of us who were pleading for him to help Africa and AIDS, you know, were delighted. But frankly, I felt, you know, coming up with $15 billion for AIDS. Now, if he could do that, he could have done it 2 years ago when we had a huge surplus. If you can face a $1.6 trillion price tag for going to war with Iraq, if you could give another tax cut this year, he wants to give $647 billion in tax cuts. Now, why not simply say, look, let's be common sense, forget about Democrat, Republican, $647 billion in tax cuts. Why don't we just give it to states and cities just for education and health care? The hell with the tax cut. You know, frankly, I'm not good at simplistic arguments. I mean, that is not simplistic. That is the way it is. Well, why do they give the tax cuts? Well, they give the tax cuts because it buys them political power. And the Republicans give it to the richest people because that's who votes for them, basically. And the Democrats try to give it to the middle class and the poor people because that's who votes for Democrats. And tax cuts are a terrific way to get votes because everybody wants to have their taxes cut. Everybody's taxes are too high. Fine. All right, so having said that, second thought, $647 billion. Give us only $500 billion. You can keep the other 140. So the money is there. The money is there. It is not a matter of not having a wallet. It's a matter of not having a political will. And that's it's sad, but that's true.
Yes, ma'am.
Seems to me that I remember when the New York State lottery started, that the money was to go for education. What happened?
What happened to the state lottery money that was supposed to go for education?
Now, that, madam, is the most asked question. No, I mean specifically, literally by actual count, over 12 years of doing shows once a week here and once a week statewide. That was the most frequently answered question, so I can give you the answer backwards, and it never works. But here's the truth. Every penny of the lottery money, even with the current administration, every penny of the lottery money, outside of the prizes, you have to take the prize money out, and the cost of administration, obviously, you have to pay the people who work it, goes into education, okay? Every bit of it. But it doesn't make any difference, because the way the political process works, they decide in the beginning of the year how much they're going to spend on education. They're going to spend $100. Say, okay, if you didn't have the lottery, they'd have to find the $100 from taxes or from the budget. Because you have the lottery, they say, how much is the lottery going to give us? They say, the lottery is going to give us $30 million. Good. $30 million from the lottery, $70 million from everywhere else. But if you didn't have the lottery, you'd still get the $100 million, just that they'd have to find it somewhere else. So the lottery does not become additional to the budget. That's the way it was sold. You know, let's have a lottery and the money will all go to education, but money is fungible. And it just displaces what they otherwise would have provided. They don't provide extra with the lottery, but it does all go to education. I guess it's about $1 billion now. I'm not sure what the number is. But it does go to education, but that doesn't make any difference. It really doesn't make any difference. Because that, all they did was substitute that. It gave them freedom to spend money on other things.
And yes, sir.
Was it a specialty high school, a private high school, or a public high school?
Well, I'm not going to get specific about what school my daughter has in mind, but I will tell you there are all kinds of good schools here. I know especially about Stuyvesant, and Stuyvesant is an important school for another reason. I spent over $100 million building the new Stuyvesant High School. And we never would have gotten that through if we had used the education budget. We didn't. We used the Battery Park budget when nobody was looking. It was legal, but it was legal. It was legal, but instead of luxury housing, I figured maybe it'd be better to have the best technical high school in the world, which is what it is. And then I was going to do the same for Bronx High School, and we did Townsend, which is a special school out in Queens. These are all schools for children with special capacities. Now, the interesting thing about Stuyvesant is that it's a merit school. You have to take a test in physics, in math and science, basically, and you have to be equipped for the kind of education you're going to get there, free. The Asian population in the city of New York is about 9 to 11%, somewhere in there. The population of Stuyvesant is 52%. Why do you give, because 52% of them passed the test. They passed the test because they're better at those subjects. They're better at those subjects because they go to school in their earlier years 220, 240 days, while we're going to school 180 days. And, you know, for years, that's another thing that has to happen to education. You go to school 180 days, you're competing in a world where they go 250, 240, 230 days in other parts of the world. And they go to school on Saturdays, et cetera, et cetera. I tried to extend the school year. All right? I thought I was doing a good thing. I said, we're going to extend the school year. They killed me. I was up in Watertown. I thought a woman was going to strangle me. Says, my son's already a basket case from pressure from the school. And what about my vacation? You know, and et cetera, et cetera. So there are all kinds of excellent schools, high schools, special high schools here for arts, for all kinds of specialties. And Bronx High School, Townsend, I don't want to name any more because I'm sure I'd leave some out, but there are many of them. Good private schools you can get anywhere.
In the back.
Yes, Governor, I didn't mean to be flippant before about asking why you don't run for office. But I've lived in this city. In fact, I lived in the same block for many years, and I raised my son, Andrew Goodman, in that house, and came to Mississippi from that place.
Oh.
And I just wanted to say that we are about to spend, or at least I'm opposed to it, a whole lot of money to tear down a church on the corner of Amsterdam Avenue and 86th Street in order to build a high-riser there. And the community is opposing. You may have read the article in the New York Times. And we don't know where they're getting the money from. But they are about to put raise that church, and this is the kind of thing that the community is trying to get together and oppose. And we don't know how to fight that. The Landmarks Commission is opposed to it, but there are forces in the community that are trying to make this city look like one great big tower. And I don't know where that kind of help can
Have you spoken to your council person? Have you spoken to Gifford Miller? Have you spoken to your assemblywoman, assemblyman, or senator?
Well, we're having a meeting and trying to get people there, and we've tried to reach them all. In fact, we've even tried to reach the related enterprises that are doing this.
You, Mrs. Goodman? If I had known, I wouldn't have answered you so flippantly when you... you know what you do? Why don't you... My name is in the book. It's a law firm. You remember Wendell Wilkie? Okay. All you have to remember is Wilkie. That's the law firm I'm in, Willkie. My number's in the book. Just give me a ring tomorrow or next day and leave you a number, and I'll be sure to get back to you, and I'll talk to you about it, okay? Great.
You know, the general question of the vertical city, which is implied in Mrs. Goodman's question, interests people. Just in terms of the visual heartbreak of 9/11 had to do with watching the tallest element of the vertical city collapse. The idea of, and it's symbolic too, the idea of New York standing is such, and then sometimes it just gets in the way, and little things get demolished, and small streets get pushed aside because of that constant surging upward. Jane was talking about the places we enjoy. It's absolutely breathtaking to think of Frederick Law Olmsted's vision with Central Park in an age where there were all farms around it. And he knew we would be in this fix. You know, he knew that we would be stuck in all these towers, and said, you know, for this, here's a spot where you can breathe. Astonishing. Adds so much to city life.
Do you know, one of the things that when the city, the economy was chugging along beautifully, and I loved seeing all the buildings being repointed. And in particular, Central Park, because I knew it wouldn't last. And sooner or later, you know, the surpluses that were allowing the co-ops to save the buildings and the park wouldn't last forever. And they finished it. And I thought, thank God, whatever comes next, you know, these beautiful improvements, you know, will see us through.
Right.
Well, you know, Central Park's a very good illustration of one of the values we have that we haven't given up. if you were Mike Bloomberg and you looked at Central Park, and if you see it from a small plane or when you're landing, you'd see how huge it is, how big a swath of land it is, and how valuable that real estate must be. You know, if somebody went to Mike Bloomberg with numbers, they would tell him, look, let's take half Central Park.
You're right.
You see, let's take half Central Park. We'll sell the damn thing to Trump and everybody else, and there goes your budget problem. It's gone. They would get killed if they even whispered. And why? Because we love Central Park that much. Incidentally, the biggest park in the city is in the Bronx, not in Manhattan. And we wouldn't do it with Forest Park. You wouldn't do it with Alley Pond Park. You wouldn't do it with any of the parks in the city. Why? Because our values are intact when it comes to that. Right. We know how important that space is to us, and that's a tribute to the city, I think.
Let's have a couple more. Yes, sir.
We've talked a lot about money and how expensive it is to live in New York. Is there anything possible that either corporations, private industry, or the government can do to make sure that New York City doesn't become a city of very rich people?
Too late. Yeah, well, let's get back to my favorite subject when it's the city, and that is that there are 5 boroughs in the city: Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island, the Bronx, and Manhattan. And really, you know, in those other 4 boroughs, Astoria, for example, somebody looking for a place to live who has to work in Manhattan, Astoria is a really good location even now. You can live there reasonably. You can live in Jackson Heights reasonably. I've seen the southern part of Brooklyn become one of the most valuable parts of real estate just because, in the city, just because people realized that it was, you know, easy to get to Manhattan from Brooklyn. So there are opportunities out there. But it's too late to reverse the pattern in New York City except to do affordable housing and to, you know, find ways in the budget to create subsidies so that people can live, middle-class people can live here in Manhattan. Where they may be working, but the temptation, see, the real estate is so valuable here. You can make so much money building luxury housing here that the thing that made this city great, and I'm repeating myself, from the beginning, was that it was an entrepreneurial haven. It was a place of business. It was 2 things. It was business, and it was a lot of people with aspirations coming here from all over the world. But we made it on the basis of business. And Manhattan is the center of banking, the center of law, the center of advertising, the center of financing most of all. And when the financing industry goes down, we go broke in the state budget. And that's tremendous pressure because the people who work there make a lot of money. They want good apartments. The restaurant business here, the theaters, the entertainment are all expensive items. And you can't, what you have to do is hope that they don't make it any harder than it now is to live here. But you're not going to turn the direction around in Manhattan.
I just remembered, I mentioned before my father having the idea after dinner, let's go to New York, and we did. We stayed at the Holiday Inn in Secaucus. I don't know, I mean, we couldn't afford Manhattan. So we stayed in the Holiday Inn, and we were day trippers and came over here and spent the day at Saks and saw a show and had dinner at the top of the Sixes and crossed the bridge and stayed in New Jersey.
Oh, Henry, what else can you expect from a town that's shut off from the world by the ocean on one side and New Jersey on the other? Yes, sir.
We have a mayor who, by general consensus, has inherited a pretty difficult situation, and yet I think there is also consensus that he might be able to make a difference in education. Perhaps this is because he hasn't learned to be a politician. I'm wondering if you think such a man can be reelected.
There's no question that he can be reelected. I'm not sure I know what you mean by he's not a politician. If he's a mayor, he's a politician. I think what you mean is he's not a lousy politician. You know, he's not a grubby politician. He's not a lying politician. He's not a deceiving politician. He's not a corrupt politician. But all those adjectives, you know, shouldn't be attached to every politician. He is a politician. He deliberately went into the political life because he liked it and because he thought he could make a contribution. And he's a very good politician. He's not doing particularly well with his political allies. Now, he chose a special kind of politics. He chose to be a Republican. He admitted that he was liberal, but he said, I'm going to choose to be a Republican because that's the practical way to get to be mayor. All right, that means his ally is the governor, who's a Republican, and the president, who's a Republican. But neither of them has offered any real help to the city at this point. And that maybe is a place where his politics hasn't worked well. Can he be reelected? I think so. And I think right now, you know, it's foolish to project that far. But what you want from your mayor, most of all, in addition to competence, is sincerity. He's a sincere, honest person, sometimes a little too honest from a political point of view. He gets himself into trouble because he doesn't try to soften the message. He doesn't schmooze you. He's not a schmoozer. I know him very well. He comes right at you with the truth, unadorned, etc. But people get used to that, they'll respect it. And and this economy will turn around. Let's face it, if you didn't stimulate it with any tax cuts, if you ended the war in Iraq, and here's a miracle I'm praying for, and I think it's possible, that when it's the last moment, when Saddam Hussein has no question at all in his mind, but that they're now going to drop a bomb on his head, when there's no German and French resistance to speak of, when everybody agrees at the United Nations that, okay, now we're going to move on him, I think he will make a deal, or that there's a good chance he will, unless you assume he wants to commit suicide. And everybody says he's crazy because he's a killer. Well, he's brutal and he's evil. I don't see any evidence anywhere that he wants to kill himself. And so it's too early for him to do it now because he can play the game now. He can say, well, the Germans are giving him a hard time. 82% of the Europeans don't want a war. Maybe I'll talk my way out of this thing. But at the last moment. Now, if that would have happened, the stock market would go up 40 points the next day, 100 points, 150 points. People would relax. There'd be a little bit more investment coming from people. So I think in a year, 2 years, the economy is going to be much better than it is now, unless we screw it up terribly with some huge commitment of tax cuts or something that just keeps. Well, we have a $300 billion deficit now. If you keep piling on that deficit, that's going to hurt you economically. It raises interest rates, does a lot of bad things. But if the economy gets better a year, 2 years from now, when he's running again, the big thing is, how good is the economy? They blame the economy on the incumbent, whether that's fair or not. If it's a good economy, you win. If it's a bad economy, you're George Bush the first time around, you lose. He was at 90% in the polls after Iraq. Iraq disappears as an issue. They look at the economy's lousy. George Bush does not get a second term. Economy will be good when Bloomberg runs again. And that's another reason for expecting that he will have a very good chance to win then.
Let's take one more. Yes, ma'am. The question is, will the governor run for president?
I had an opportunity and in 1991 and wasn't able to. I think because I was still governor and for a whole lot of reasons. But I think, you know, now what you need to run for president is a huge amount of money, a huge mechanism. I mean, just think about Gary Hart. There are a lot of people in this country that want to see Gary Hart try again and are intrigued by him and remember him as being a very intelligent guy. He had that problem, which does, well, you know, considering what happened after But he doesn't have the mechanism. You don't have the money. Lieberman and Edwards and Kerry already have millions of dollars rolling in, so it's just not. What I am going to do and what I've started doing is moving around the country talking about issues. But that, and I'll make every contribution.
That's good
that
enough.
I
Thank
can.
you. All evenings at the Y are always the ones that just should go on and continue, and we can't do that. We have a time limit. But one other thing I read about the city in preparation for tonight was Agatha Christie, when asked why didn't she ever set a detective story in New York, said, because New York is a detective story. And I started to think about this, you know, and it has to do with a question that you asked plaintively about, is the city getting so rich that the poor are left behind? That was the implication of your question. The interesting thing about it, and also has to do with the world that Andrew Goodman wanted to improve and lost his life in so doing, is that for all the wealth in New York, for all the building, for all the vaunted ambition and the great things, the great magnificent, really oversized things that the city does, the part of the detective story, the other story that's going on, is that there is in most New Yorkers, and I think we feel this, a civilizing element, an idea of being responsible for those who have less, to try to make up to those who need more, to devote ourselves, as Jane does, to the thought of education, to wonder desperately why this great city does not have a great educational system. All of these things are not simply idle thoughts. They are in us as much as the daily ambitions and the little worries about, are we going to get lunch for the kids and that sort of thing. And those things really characterize the city as much as anything else. The good wishes, the good gestures, the intuitive lurchings in the right direction. In any case, we are lucky to have with us two remarkable citizens of this city, and thank you, Jane. Thank you, Mario. Thank you.